I'll be talking about the summit now, a little closer to where we are. While all that was going on, all those interesting things in the East Rift Zone, things were changing at the summit, starting in basically around November. This is a plot of the seismic tremor at the summit. You can think of the tremor as kind of the background hum of the volcano. And we see that the tremor levels, with some interruptions, start increasing in basically November. And they reach values that are 5 or more times greater than the normal levels. At about the same time, late 2007, the gas emission from the summit starts increasing and actually reaches quite high levels in March. Now, just having these two data sets, these two alone would be a fairly compelling case for, well, something is changing at the summit, something fundamental. And these two alone would be stand on their own fairly strongly as good indicators of activity and possibly a summit eruption to come. The problem was it wasn't that simple. While the seismic tremor and the gas was increasing, the summit was deflating. And like I said, the deflation normally is associated with a decrease in magma supply, so it's kind of counterintuitive. So it's conflicting. But adding to that is the fact that the last at least 4 or 5 summit eruptions in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s were preceded by weeks or months of very pronounced inflation. That's not what we were seeing. So to say the least, there was conflicting information. But something was definitely changing. And the case for an impending eruption and impending activity was really bolstered by the appearance of a very large and hot fumarole on the southeast rim of Halemaumau crater, just below the overlook here. This is the visitor overlook. This portion of the caldera, however, was shut off. The access to this area was shut off in February, I believe, due to the increased gas emissions. So there weren't any tourists walking around the overlook. This fumarolic area glowed at night, so we knew it was hot, and with extremely hot, and with all this increased gas, it was a pretty good case that magma had found its way to shallow levels. And it didn't take too long for the next event to happen. On March 19th, early in the morning, there was an explosive eruption from that fumarolic area that opened up a new vent, 35 meters, or about 100 feet wide. And the important thing and from that point, there was a degassing plume that was emitted. This is the first eruption at the summit since 1982, which was fountaining and lava flows. This was the first explosive eruption since 1924. But it's important to realize that this explosion was very much smaller than that 1924 explosion. This was, in fact, a very small event. But it's always humbling to remind yourself that what's small on a geologic scale can be quite significant on a human scale. This is one of the largest, or the largest block that we found ejected from the vent, and all of these blocks were ejected during that explosion. Brief interruption with some terminology. Explosive eruptions produce 2 types of ejecta. We call lithic ejecta, which is basically old lava from previous eruptions. This is usually the lava that's just blasted out by the energy of the explosion, and usually comprises, say, the conduit walls. And this lava is often, or this ejecta is often dense and angular. And contrast that with juvenile lava, which is the other type, and this is basically new lava from fresh magma, and it's often light and frothy here because it's full of bubbles. So that March 19th eruption was entirely lithic. There were no juvenile particles erupted during that first event. Here's a view of the Halemaumau overlook. You can see the fence was damaged, and these are blocks ejected during that explosion. And the visitor parking lot was carpeted in these pebble-sized particles. Now, it was a few days later that we actually saw the first juvenile ejecta. And this occurred, there were some HVO volunteers on the Jagera Overlook looking out, and they saw these, what looked like little fireflies coming up from the vent. And there was, the spattering went on for basically the last week in March, maybe a little bit in early April, but hasn't been seen since. This was the first juvenile ejecta, like I said, and this was really a strong indicator that that magma was indeed at shallow levels. So since that vent opened, there's been a persistent degassing plume carried southwest during the normal trade winds. It looks like this. And here's a satellite image of the summit plume going to the southwest, and also you can see the Pu'uo'o plume and the ocean entry plume here. And as many of you know, this being carried to the southwest, this normally affects air quality on the south and west side of the island.